Hi, everybody, and welcome back to EBnet Stream. We recently published an article from Kerry King, who's an advisory partner at Citadel, around drawdowns and the impact of inflation and the things we need to be thinking about. Now, I'll admit, drawdowns is not something I understand. And in a shameless search for free financial planning advice, I reached out to Kerry, and I'm happy to have this conversation with her in front of everybody in our community, and so that you can learn with me as we explore what drawdowns are and what they mean. So Kerry, welcome to EBnet Stream.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Right, let's start with the basics. And I tongue-in-cheek said I don't understand a lot about drawdowns. I mean, I will admit, just between us, of course, that I really don't. And so in my mind, drawdowns are something that applies to a living annuity. I retire from my retirement fund, I purchase a living annuity, and then I have to make some sort of decision. Maybe you can kind of add some color to that.
Okay, perfect. So yes, when you retire from your retirement funds, you actually have a couple of choices. It's not just a living annuity. So you can either go and you can buy yourself a fixed annuity, or you can buy yourself a living annuity. Now, as you know, or have heard from previously a couple of years ago, provident funds and pension funds now have the same rules. So you can only take out 1/3 of your cash and the balance has to go into some sort of annuity. Now, the difference between the fixed annuity and the living annuity, the fixed annuity is almost, I would call it an insurance product. So you give somebody some money and you say to them, okay, pay me a monthly amount. And you can say, well, maybe I want an inflationary draw increase every year, or maybe I want 8%, you can pick a number. And then on the other side is obviously the living annuity, which limits your draws to 2.5% and 17.5% per annum. And then you can have that paid monthly, quarterly, annually, whichever you feel best. But it is quite important, I think, to go back and say, yes, that's what we need for our pension fund. But actually, I think the start is, what do you need on a monthly basis?
So great to kind of start with a budget, because my next question was going to be, I can draw down, to clarify, anywhere between 2.5% and 17.5%. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
so
correct.
anywhere between that. But I guess my drawdown or my draw would be what I would need. And so how do I target, while I'm saving, what I will need when I retire?
So a budget. So the one big word that we all keep harping on about is have a budget. And do you know how many people don't have a budget? But it is worthwhile, even if you just did it for 3 months of a year, where you write down every single thing that you spend in a month. Because we all forget about nipping off to the shops to buy the milk or the bread, or nipping off to the shops, and next thing you walk out and you've got a whole packet. And that wasn't really part of the budget. But anyway, the point is that to understand what you need, and then not all your income that you require, let's just give it a number, 10,000 Rand a month or 20,000 Rand a month from your budget. Now, everything that you need in that budget doesn't have to come from the living annuity. So hopefully, when you have been doing your savings, if you've had a good advisor along the way, they would have taught you that you need to build 2 pots when you are busy saving for retirement. You need to build a discretionary pot and you need to build your retirement pot. Because anything that you draw from your retirement pot is going to be taxable. So, and anything you draw from your discretionary pot is not taxable. Well, it'll be capital gainsable generally. So you want to try and manage the draw from both, because tax actually can eat away some of your income that you receive. So you want to try and make sure that you get, in an ideal world, let's call it, you want to have 50% from the living annuity and 50% from your capital. And that will help keep your tax down. But then also just make sure that you need to make sure that that works into your living allowance and into your budget. So the other thing is that the other part of it is a lot of people retire and suddenly start going, okay, what can I afford?
Which is exactly where my mind went when you initially started talking about living annuities, and the drawdown and the decisions I'm going to have to make when I eventually in 35 years time get there. um, yeah, so it's interesting to me. So AI, I will admit, didn't tell me about this kind of discretionary, non-taxable versus, the living annuity taxable income. So there's an interesting point to loop back to later. But back into this living annuity, I'm going to save a whole pile of money while I'm working.
Yeah.
And how, what are the factors that are taken into account when a person retires and they purchase their living annuity and the kind of cost of that? What impacts the cost of those living annuities and kind of do I have to shop around?
Great question. Great question, Natalie, because actually, as a financial advisor, there are many financial advisors out there, and costs have actually come to the fore quite a lot on investing, and costs do vary. So, and different solutions come with different costs, but don't always just, it's not just about costs. It's also
Sure.
about a solution. You don't, it's crazy if you are driving a Toyota and you change to a Swift because you need to, or are you driving a Toyota for very specific reasons? So you just need to make sure that what are you getting for
Okay.
your money, and and is the person that is dealing with you, do you trust them? And do you trust their advice? So come back to cost. So yes, so there are costs involved, as we all know. So there always is going to be an advice fee, and there always is going to be a platform fee, and there's always going to be a fund that you're going to go into.
Mm,
What is important, though, is that your financial advisor looks at the whole picture. So at
mm,
Citadel, we've got this wonderful program where we look at, I would call it life savings and your spending patterns. It's really nice to see when you put it in there, when you have a look at what your capital is, what you can draw on a monthly basis, and how
yes.
long that is going to last. Because we all know that generally you spend slightly more in your early retirement years than you do in your later retirement years. And so hopefully medical doesn't catch up with you too much, but generally
Mm,
that's when you've just started retiring, you're generally healthy, you can travel more, and you can do that kind of
true.
thing. Whereas in the later, when you get to your 80s, that's not always the case. We all hope
Mm,
that we're nice and healthy, but that is not always the case. Yeah.
sure.
So yes. So let's loop back again. So yes. So costs are important. Yes, there will always be a cost, but shop around, have a look at different people, different companies, but choose somebody that you can relate to. It's
Mm,
so important
good
to be
advice.
able to relate to the person who actually understands you and understands your family and who your family can go to in if there's a crisis.
It's almost like I always tell people, it's almost like choosing a doctor.
It
Find
is.
somebody who understands you and who has a great bedside manner, and that's you're halfway there. Back to the kind of pension that you can get at retirement. Is there a rule of thumb? So I often hear, I have heard, that 1 million rand saved will buy you a pension of 5,000 rand a month or 10,000 rand a month. I mean, is there this kind of guideline out there?
So if you're buying a pension, okay, we're talking about fixed pensions then. So it
Okay.
actually is pretty dependent on your age and actually on interest rates. So if interest rates are really high, you generally will get more on a monthly basis. But you are going to have to shop around because
Okay.
different companies take on different amounts, different costs and different ways of working, doing their actuarial calculations on all of that. So you do have to have a look around. Generally, though, as a rule of thumb, I like to use like a 4% draw. So if you had capital of, let's call it 1 million rand, and on a 4% draw, so you want to annually. That'll be your annual draw, and then divided by your the number of months that you want to draw it. So I think it's a good rule of thumb, 4% draw on your capital. I wouldn't go higher than that. I know that a lot of people use 5%, but what worries me, and I actually mentioned it, I think, in the article, was inflation. And
Yes.
And markets are uncertain. Nobody can predict what's going to happen in the next 30 years.
EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channels by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it, and give us thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. That way, you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.ebnet.co.za.
So let's hone in on that, because that is what the article was about. So we're talking about living annuities, and we're talking about the macros. And the macros are stuff that we can't control. So we can't control inflation, we can't control the markets, we certainly can't control the geopolitics. I'm not even sure the politicians can control the geopolitics right now.
No.
But what we can control is the draw. And how much we take from our living annuity. And just so that anybody watching this understands, a living annuity really is giving your savings to a provider, and they then pay you a pension, but you get to say how much of that pension, between 2.5% and 17.5%, you receive every month. Now, if I was in that situation, right, and the world is the way it is, what should I be looking at? So we know inflation targeting is at the 3% level. Look, markets this year are crazy. I just keep saying it. What should those who are drawing from their living annuities be thinking about right now?
I take a conservative view. I mean, I grew up in a very little town in Natal, and I had a very, very conservative father. So that is actually my history, and that's where I come from. That's what I was taught. So it really is dependent a lot on how you see money. So I am probably more conservative than most. So if you think about it, so let's call it a 4% draw. So on average, we're going to have costs of, let's assume, 2%. So there's a 6% draw on that portfolio. If inflation's running at 3%, we want to be getting at least 4% above inflation. So we want to be getting 7.5% return. Because if you are earning below that, you actually are depleting your capital.
Emptying your pot.
So you have to be careful about that. Yes, we've had amazing returns, and we actually on average say that we will always get a minimum of 2.5% above inflation every single year after costs, after any taxes. So that's quite a nice rule of thumb. But let's go back to, if you need to be on average trying to get a 7-8% return if you are drawing a 5 or 6% draw, because you want to try and be keeping up with inflation. Inflation will vary, so will markets. And when times are good, it doesn't mean that you can actually draw more from the portfolio. It actually means save a little bit for the rainy day, because markets do go up and down, and they are cyclical. And yes, we've had beautiful returns, but 2022 was not so pretty, and COVID, when it dropped 40%, was not really pretty. And so those are hard times to go through. And so, yes, I always say be conservative where you can be. The other thing that I've found worked really well is, if possible, and not everybody, it's possible on everybody, is to try and earn a little bit of income when you first start retiring, because your pension fund's at its peak, so your compounding works well. So if you've got a 2 million rand pension fund, and generally you're getting about 8 or 10%, means you're adding 200,000 to that or 180,000 to that every year, which is great. And if you can supplement your income just with a little bit on the side, I don't know, it just goes so much further. Your pension just seems to last a lot longer.
Okay. So to anybody who is coming up to retirement, try and not work longer, but supplement your income. And I suppose that could be a rental property even or something like that.
It could even just be taking a menial job down the road, doing a few admin chores for people around you. The other thing is that generally people, once they retire, they actually do land up spending a little bit less. And maybe you're not driving to work every day, so petrol's a bit less. Maybe you're not as indulgent on your groceries because you're not doing the convenient stuff anymore. It does come down. Obviously, you hope that your medical expenses are under control.
Always the unknown. And maybe your children are finally off your bank account, but we can dream.
I look forward to that.
Me too.
Right
I wonder what it feels like.
Right now, it feels like they'll never get there. But yes, it is a good idea to have them off your bank account before you retire.
Girl can dream. So Kerry, then to wrap up, because I see that we're coming up to the end of our meeting time. But to wrap up, then, for those who are invested in living annuities or thinking about living annuities right now, anything that the current macros are red flags for you at the moment? I mean, are you advising your clients or potential clients, watch out for this or look out for that?
Generally, if you are coming out of a market already, so from your pension fund going into a living annuity, remember, if you have come out the market and gone straight back into that market, that's not a big problem. But there are a lot of people, a lot of companies that use, and I can't remember the exact wording, but what they do is that as you get closer and closer to retirement, they start putting all your investments into cash, which you're never going to spend all your money on one day when you retire. So you don't need to put it all into cash at that point in time. If your pension fund is like that, and that's what they do, and they've worked it down to cash till the last day, when you go into your living annuity, just be aware of markets. Because you don't want to suddenly put everything into markets and suddenly it drops in 2 months' time by 30% or 20%, because that is a real loss on your portfolio. So I would just be careful of that. So just understand, and again, a financial advisor would be able to advise you on this, but understand what your pension fund's invested in and what you're going into. And just, if it's not in the market, if it's in cash, just phase it into the market, give yourself a bit of breathing space to get in, because as we know at the moment, markets are pretty high. Equity markets have run beautifully, which we're not upset about, but it does mean going in at these levels can be quite tricky. So then just phase it in rather. But if it's coming out of a market and you're going straight back into a market, perfect. Absolutely fine, because you've had that growth anyway. So I'm just saying, be aware of it.
Yeah. Okay. So you went into the last stage defaults, which is the wording you were looking for, I think.
Yes.
And so I'm going to go there and scratch that itch. It is customary for a lot of retirement funds to what they call life stage their members into less risky portfolios. So let's not say cash, although the number is alarmingly high of, if we look at the latest research of the number of funds that do downgrade or kind of down risk into cash. But yeah, not ideal for an individual who, as you rightly point out, will be reinvesting into the market the very next day. So
100%.
Ideally within your fund, you'd want to align your investment strategy in fund with what you are choosing at retirement. And that requires financial advice. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, no, you do have to look at it. You should only really be holding about 2 years worth of cash of what you're going to be drawing off your living annuity at any one point in time. Then you obviously need a little bit of a backstop or kind of a safety net. And then the balance of the portfolio should always be in higher risk investments where you can actually get the capital growth. We know that over time, cash doesn't actually always even give you inflation. Depends on the market. So, but cash doesn't give you inflation after tax. So that's tricky. Your portfolio that's unstable or in a kind of a safety net will probably only give you inflation plus 1 or 2. You need, at the end of the day, you need the equities in the portfolio to give you that little bit of a booster, which will give you inflation plus 3 or 4%. So that life staging, yes, it's quite controversial. I don't love it just because yes, I think that there is a place for it. But it also depends on how big your portfolio is and depending on what you're planning on doing. Yes, if you're going to draw your full 1/3, that should be in cash when you're going to draw it, because you don't want to have the market drop and then you're going to draw and have real losses on that portfolio.
Look, with the new two-pot retirement system, I think, I'm going to say something controversial, but I'll say it at the end, so hopefully nobody will watch all the way through the whole interview. But with the two-pot retirement system, jokes aside, the opportunity for, in my opinion, for greater risk in the preserved or the compulsory pot is really an easy decision right now. It is something that, you can't get your hands on in cash upfront. And yeah, I mean, should be factored into the trustees' in-fund decision making when it comes to their investments, but also into their annuity preferences that they would be setting forward or putting forward to members as real options.
Yeah, agreed. And it does, so that the two-pot system has definitely had a huge number of advantages. I think there are a couple of disadvantages too, because I really don't think that people should be drawing at all on their pension funds before pension date. But situations happen and circumstances sometimes get beyond control of the individual. So, but yes, I agree. You should never have the life staging in that pot that's supposed to be invested in equities. And because yes, that is there for the proper growth so that you can rely on it in 20 and 30 years time, that it's going to be available to you. And actually, and we all know that we don't want to rely on our children well, as much as we might have educated them well, we don't want to have to rely on them to fund us one day. Because it's a gift in itself if we can actually be financially independent. It's a gift for them.
I always say the best gift you can give your children is to be financially independent as their parent. And so thank you for that. Kerry, we are over time. A fascinating conversation, which I look forward to building on in the future. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Natalie, and thanks so much for the interview.